History isn't a static line drawn on a map. It's a shifting boundary, forged in the spaces where civilizations meet, clash, and blur together. From the bustling merchant ports of Tyre and the towering battlements of Carthage, to the cryptic whispers of the Delphic Oracle and the bloody waters of the Peloponnesian War, this is where the known world met the unknown. Welcome to Frontiers of Antiquity. Join us as we look beneath the surface of the classical world to uncover the human rivalries, the structural conflicts, and the ancient histories that built our modern world.
So picture this. It's 475 BC, and there's this really ambitious Athenian general named Cimon.
Right, a major player at the time.
Exactly. And Cimon has just conquered this tiny but extremely strategically important island in the Aegean Sea called Skyros. But, securing the actual territory just wasn't enough for him.
Because imperialism is a hard sell.
Yeah. He needed a narrative. He needed the citizens back home in Athens to see this military expansion not as some, aggressive land grab, but as a sacred patriotic duty.
A holy crusade, almost.
Right, a crusade. So Cimon basically orders his men to just start digging. They scour this island until they supposedly discover this massive ancient grave. And inside, according to the story, were the skeletal remains of an unusually large man buried right alongside a bronze spear and a sword.
Which is incredibly convenient.
Oh, incredibly. So Cimon loads these giant bones onto his flagship, sails them back to Athens with just a massive pomp and circumstance, and declares to this cheering, weeping public that he has rescued the physical remains of their ultimate founding father.
It is honestly one of the greatest public relations stunts in ancient history.
And it worked perfectly. And that right there, that moment, is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Yeah, because it completely changes how you look at the ancient world.
It really does. I mean, we often look back at ancient Greek myths and assume they were just passive folklore, right?
Yeah.
Like simple bedtime stories meant to entertain kids or maybe explain why a thunderstorm is happening.
But when you actually examine the geopolitical reality of the time, that innocence completely vanishes. Like instantly.
Right. What we are actually looking at, and what the source material for today's deep dive argues so brilliantly, is state-sponsored ideological engineering.
It's propaganda. Highly sophisticated propaganda.
Exactly. So today, we are diving into a really fascinating university lecture that sits right at the intersection of mythology, Bronze Age history, and this massive ideological proxy war between ancient Athens and Sparta.
And our subject is the legendary Greek hero, Theseus.
Yes, Theseus. Now, if you are listening to this, you probably have a very specific pop culture image of Theseus in your head, right?
Oh, definitely. The action hero.
Yeah, the brave guy who navigates a creepy maze with a ball of string and, slays a monster with the head of a bull. But today, we are putting that bedtime story completely aside. We are going to decode the myth and look at the blueprints of how a developing superpower quite literally manufactured a hero to legitimize its empire.
And the source material we're digging into today provides a brilliant breakdown of this exact machinery. It just strips away all the romanticism.
Which I love.
Me too. It forces us to ask how classical Athenian democracy, a society that prided itself on radical civic participation and the overthrow of tyrants, somehow managed to use a supposedly ancient king to justify a modern political system.
It's basically a masterclass in ancient statecraft. And to you, the listener, understanding this mechanism is so crucial if you want to make sense of the world today, because modern nations constantly use storytelling and architecture and media to legitimize their power, right? Oh, all the time. To define who they are against their rivals.
Exactly. And the ancient Greeks perfected that blueprint. So to understand how that works, we really have to start with the foundational elements of the Theseus narrative. And that means looking at his actual origin story.
Which is where things get biologically weird but politically brilliant.
Yes, because according to the myth, Theseus possesses what the sources call dual parentage.
Right, which is where the political calculation becomes just immediately obvious.
Right, so let's lay out the story. The myth says that Princess Aethra of Trusan slept with King Aegeus of Athens. But then, on that exact same night, she wanders down to the shore and also sleeps with the sea god Poseidon.
As one does.
Right, naturally.
Yeah.
And consequently, Theseus is born with two fathers. Now, I read that and immediately think of the sheer convenience of it, like obviously it's a biological impossibility.
Sure.
But politically, it is a perfectly engineered resume. So how does the academic source material unpack the strategic value of this highly specific dual lineage? Well, the analysis insists we have to look at this through the lens of 5th century Athenian politics. This dual lineage performs two very distinct and very necessary functions for the state.
Okay, breaks those down for me.
So first, we have the mortal claim. King Aegeus provides Theseus with a legitimate human bloodline, tying him directly to the throne of Athens.
Okay, so it roots the hero in the soil of the city.
Exactly. He is not some foreign conqueror arriving to subjugate the populace. He is the rightful heir returning to his ancestral seat. And that establishes domestic political stability.
It gives them historical continuity. It lets the ruling class say, you know, we belong in power because our ancestors built the throne.
Yes, exactly.
I totally understand the need for the earthly mandate. But then you introduce Poseidon into the mix. If Athens is already secure in its local terrestrial history, why do they need the complication of a divine sea god as a co-father?
Well, to understand that, we have to step back and look at Athens' actual historical reality during its golden age. Because classical Athens was fundamentally different from Sparta.
Right, Sparta was the land power.
Exactly. Sparta was a land-based power with an invincible infantry. Athens, however, was a maritime empire.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Following the Persian Wars, Athens took leadership of this thing called the Delian League. And it began as a mutual defense pact, right? Various Greek city-states teaming up against Persian aggression.
Like an ancient NATO.
Basically, yeah. But very quickly, Athens transformed that voluntary alliance into a strict imperial tribute system.
They got greedy.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
They moved the league's treasury directly to Athens. They built an absolutely massive navy, and they began forcing other city-states to remain in the league, effectively subjugating them.
So their entire geopolitical survival, their massive wealth, their grain supply, all of it depended on absolute dominance over the agency.
Precisely. And imperial dominance requires justification.
Yeah.
If you tell your allies, hey, we rule the sea because we have the most warships and we will destroy you if you try to leave our alliance.
You foster constant rebellion. People hate that.
Exactly. It's bad optics and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
But if your founding hero is the literal son of Poseidon, the god of the oceans, earthquakes, and raw maritime power.
Oh, wow. Then you aren't just an empire of convenience. You are an empire of divine destiny.
Yes, you're communicating to the rest of the Mediterranean that the sea belongs to Athens by sacred birthright.
That is so smart. The religious mandate basically just covers up the brute force of imperialism.
It's the ultimate velvet glove over an iron fist. And the geopolitical strategy embedded in this origin story, it doesn't even stop at the two fathers.
Really? There's more?
Oh, yeah. The geography of the mother's hometown is equally calculated.
Right, Princess Aethra.
Yes. She is from Troezen.
Now, I saw that in the sources. The sources mention Troezen is a Peloponnesian city-state. And my understanding of ancient Greek geography, which, isn't perfect, is that the Peloponnese Peninsula is essentially Sparta's backyard.
It absolutely is. It's Dorian territory.
Right. It's deeply entrenched in Spartan influence. So why on earth would Athens want their greatest, most patriotic hero to be born in rival territory? That seems like a bad PR move.
On the surface, it seems completely counterproductive. But when you look at the historical reality of the Persian Wars, it reveals the sheer genius behind it.
Okay, tell me about the Persian Wars connection.
So during the massive Persian invasion of Greece, things got incredibly desperate for Athens. Athens itself was actually evacuated and eventually burned to the ground by the Persian army.
Right, the citizens had to flee.
Yes, and during that time, the citizens of Troezen offered crucial sanctuary to those Athenian refugees. They were a Peloponnesian city that acted as a staunch, vital ally to Athens during its absolute darkest hour.
Oh, that completely flips the dynamic.
Right.
So the myth is acting as a diplomatic treaty, but it's written in the language of religion.
That's a great way to put it. It permanently cements a real-world political alliance. By establishing Troezen as the birthplace of Theseus, Athens is essentially telling them, look, we aren't just temporary military allies of convenience. Our bond goes back to the dawn of our civilization.
Our greatest king is half yours.
Exactly. It weaves contemporary diplomacy into unquestionable sacred tradition.
That is incredible. Every single detail, the mortal king, the god of the sea, the strategic hometown of the mother, it's all a calculated brick in the foundation of their national identity.
Nothing is accidental.
But, having a highly tailored resume is only the first step. You still have to prove you can execute the job, right?
You need a track record.
Exactly. Once Theseus discovers his lineage in Troezen, he has to travel to Athens to claim his throne. And according to the sources, the journey he chooses to take is highly specific and deeply symbolic.
He chooses the coastal highway, the road along the Saronic Gulf.
And why is that significant?
Well, the choice of the coastal road, rather than taking a much safer inland route or just, taking a ship across the water, is the mechanism the myth uses to build his civic resume.
Right, because he encounters these 6 landmark labors along this road. He's constantly confronted by a series of bandits. But as the source material points out, these aren't just random highway robbers politely asking for a toll.
Now, they are terrifying.
They are. The sources highlight the bizarre, really sadistic nature of these figures. Take Procrustes, for example. I think he is perhaps the most famous of these bandits.
Definitely the most memorable.
Yeah, so the story goes that Procrustes would wait on the highway, invite travelers into his home, and offer them a bed for the night. Seems hospitable, right?
A trap, obviously.
A huge trap, because if the traveler was too short for the bed, he would literally stretch them on a rack until their joints popped and they fit the mattress perfectly.
It's awful.
And if they were too tall, he would amputate their feet or their legs until they matched the length of the bed. It is just this grotesque image of forced conformity.
It is grotesque. But it represents a core anxiety in the Greek worldview.
What's that?
The terror of chaos and the arbitrary abuse of power. See, Procrustes is acting as a petty tyrant of the wilderness. He operates totally outside the boundaries of civilized society, and he's enforcing his own deranged, localized laws upon innocent travelers.
Okay, so how does Theseus handle him? Because from what I read, he doesn't just, run him through with a sword and keep walking toward Athens.
No, he doesn't. He imposes what the source material refers to as a civilizing mission. Theseus forces Procrustes into his own bed and subjects him to the exact same sadistic treatment.
He cuts the cutter.
He cuts the cutter. He stretches the stretcher.
I have to admit, reading that, it feels a bit contradictory.
How so?
Well, if Theseus is supposed to represent enlightened, civilized Athens, why is his form of justice just as brutal and barbaric as the criminals? How is repeating the torture an act of civilization?
That is such a good question, and it's a crucial distinction we have to make regarding the ancient concept of justice.
Okay, break it down for me.
In a pre-state society, violence is arbitrary. It's just a private vendetta. Whoever is strongest wins. But what Theseus is doing is transforming arbitrary violence into institutional poetic justice.
I see.
By turning the bandits' own methods against him, Theseus is demonstrating the foundational principle of a legal system. The punishment must perfectly fit the crime.
Oh, wow. So it's not just revenge.
Right. He is taking a chaotic, lawless frontier and demonstrating that actions have rational, proportional consequences.
It's the transition from a world where might makes right to a world governed by an overarching moral logic.
Exactly. He's making the commercial highways safe for trade, safe for travel, and safe for the expansion of the city-state. He is literally clearing the path for civilization.
And that social cleansing on the highway, that's really just the necessary prerequisite before he can face the defining mythological challenge of his life.
The big one.
The big one, the Cretan cycle, the story of the Minotaur.
This is where the historical archaeology gets absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh, I agree. Now let's lay out the narrative as pop culture understands it first, because the sources we are looking at completely dismantle it.
They tear it apart.
Yeah. So the standard myth claims that Athens was this weak, subjugated city forced to pay a horrific tribute to King Minos of Crete. And the tribute is 7 young men and 7 maidens.
Sent as human sacrifices, basically.
Right. They are shipped across the sea, thrown into a sprawling, inescapable underground labyrinth, and then devoured by the Minotaur, this terrifying beast that is half man and half bull.
Classic monster movie setup.
Exactly. And then Theseus volunteers as a tribute, sails to Crete, navigates the maze with the help of Princess Ariadne's ball of thread, slaughters the beast, and liberates his people.
It's a fantastic action-adventure script.
It really is.
Yep.
Here is where I struggle with this and where I think any modern reader would pause. I look at the rational, calculated statecraft we just discussed regarding his parentage and the highway labors, right?
Very grounded stuff.
Yeah, very political. But then suddenly we get a magic labyrinth and a teenager-eating bull monster. It feels totally out of place. It sounds like a highly dramatized metaphor for something else. So what is the actual historical reality hidden beneath this monster story?
Okay, so the source lecture provides a phenomenal archaeological perspective on this. And the key thing to understand is that the Cretan cycle is not an invention of classical Athens.
That's not.
No. It is a stylized, heavily distorted cultural memory of late Bronze Age geopolitics.
Wait, Bronze Age, so we are reaching back.
Thousands of years. thousands of years before the democratic Athens we usually think of. We're talking roughly the 15th and 14th centuries BC.
Okay, so this is the Mycenaean period, long before iron weapons, long before philosophy or democracy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And during this era, the archaeological record confirms that the Minoan civilization, which was centered on the island of Crete, was the undisputed superpower of the Aegean.
They were the big kids on the block.
Oh, massive. The sources use the term thalassocracy, which means a maritime empire. The Minoans dominated the sea routes, they controlled trade, and they possessed immense, unimaginable wealth.
And what was the relationship between this Minoan superpower and the mainland Greeks, the ancestors of the Athenians?
Well, the mainland settlements were significantly weaker. They were less developed, and they were economically subordinate to Crete.
Oh, so they were essentially vassals.
Exactly. So when the myth speaks of a tribute of young men and women, we are actually looking at the mythological echo of actual economic subjugation.
So it wasn't monster food.
No. The Minoans likely demanded heavy taxes, raw materials, and very possibly human capital.
Human capital, like slaves.
Hostages, forced labor, maybe mercenaries drawn from the mainland.
Yeah.
And the mainland Greeks deeply, deeply resented this foreign hegemony.
Okay, that makes perfect geopolitical sense. The monster represents the crushing weight of a foreign empire's tax demands.
Right.
But why this specific imagery? I mean, why a labyrinth and why a bowl? Those are very specific choices.
They are. And the answers lie right in the ruins of the Minoan capital, the Palace of Knossos.
Okay, tell me about Knossos.
When early archaeologists, like Arthur Evans, began excavating Knossos, they didn't find a standard medieval-style castle. They uncovered an absolutely massive, sprawling, multi-story architectural complex.
How massive are we talking?
Hundreds and hundreds of interconnected rooms, plunging light wells, complex drainage systems, and these vast, winding networks of basement storage magazines where they kept all the wealth of their empire.
Wow.
Yeah. And think about it. To a less developed mainland Greek, someone arriving at Knossos to pay tribute, navigating that highly advanced palatial center would be entirely disorienting.
It would literally feel like walking into a trap.
Exactly. An inescapable maze. The actual physical architecture of Knossos birthed the concept of the labyrinth.
That is incredible. The terrifying magic dungeon of the myth is actually just the overwhelming administrative bureaucracy of a superior civilization.
That's exactly what it is.
And the bull. Where does the half-man, half-bull come from?
Well, bulls were the central religious and cultural icon of Minoan society.
Really? Just everywhere?
Everywhere. The walls of Knossos are covered in these vibrant frescoes depicting a sport or a ritual known as bull leaping.
Bull leaping, like jumping over them?
Yes. Athletic youths would actually vault over the horns of massive charging bulls. It was a huge part of their culture. And they had these giant stone horns of consecration decorating the roof lines of the palace. The bull was the ultimate expression of Minoan power.
Okay, so let me put this together. You take centuries of oral tradition, you play a massive game of historical telephone over hundreds of years, and the memory of, quote, traveling to the confusing, terrifying palace of the bull-worshipping kings to pay our taxes,
Yes.
morphs into wandering into a labyrinth to be eaten by a bull monster.
That is exactly how myth-making processes historical trauma. It turns geopolitical reality into a monster story.
That is just brilliant. But the narrative doesn't end with just subjugation, right? The myth ends with Theseus killing the bust and escaping.
Right, he wins.
Does that correlate with the historical shift, too? Did the mainland Greeks actually overthrow the Minoan Empire?
They absolutely did. Between roughly 1450 and 1370 BC, the power dynamic in the Aegean completely inverted.
The underdogs fought back.
Yeah. The mainland Mycenaean Greeks, the civilization that Theseus represents in this historical timeline, they grew militarily powerful enough to actually cross the sea and conquer Knossos.
Wow.
They shattered the Minoan thalassocracy and seized control of the Aegean trade networks for themselves. So the image of Theseus striking down the Minotaur in the dark heart of the labyrinth, that is the triumphant mythologized memory of Mycenaean dominance finally destroying Minoan hegemony.
It is a geopolitical revolution masked as a monster hunt.
Perfectly said.
But I want to focus on the aftermath of that victory for a second, because the journey home to Athens features this really tragic climax that the sources point out serves a very specific territorial purpose.
Ah, yes, the incident with the sails.
Right. So before Theseus originally left Athens for Crete, he made an arrangement with his father, King Aegeus. Because the ship was carrying the victims of the tribute, it departed with black sails, which was a symbol of mourning.
Obviously, they thought everyone was going to die.
Right. But Theseus promises his father that if he survives, if he kills the Minotaur, he will change those sails to white on his return voyage. That way, Aegeus, who is going to be watching from the cliffs, would know his son was safe before the ship even reached the port.
It's a simple signal system.
Very simple. But in the excitement of the victory, Theseus forgets.
He just forgets. He leaves the black sails hoisted.
And King Aegeus is waiting, right? He's
Yeah.
standing on this high, rocky promontory called Cape Cernion, looking out over the water day after day.
Just agonizing over his son's fate.
Yeah. And then finally he sees the ship approaching. But he recognizes the black sails, and he is just overcome with absolute despair. Believing his son has been devoured and his royal lineage is destroyed, Aegeus throws himself off the cliffs and plunges to his death in the waters below.
It's a devastating moment. A really tragic end to a heroic victory.
A catastrophic lapse in memory ruins everything. But the sources point out this isn't just a dramatic twist for the sake of a good story. It operates as a foundational naming myth.
Right, because the king of Athens drowned in those specific waters, the sea itself was forever named after him.
The agency.
The agency.
Which brings us right back to the imperial propaganda we discussed earlier with his sea godfather, Poseidon. Every single time an Athenian sailor or merchant looked out at the water, every time a foreign diplomat sailed toward the city, they were forced to use a name that tied the physical geography of the ocean directly to the bloodline of the Athenian monarchy.
It's basically an assertion of ownership woven into the map itself.
It permanently brands their maritime empire.
Exactly. It's incredibly effective branding.
Okay, so let's look at where we are so far. Theseus has established his divine and mortal lineage. He has cleared the highways and established a system of proportional justice, and he has toppled a foreign superpower.
That is an unparalleled heroic resume.
Unmatched. But here's the administrative reality. Winning a war and killing a monster does not build a functioning state.
No, it doesn't.
Liberation is not the same thing as governance. And that brings us to the most crucial political utility of the myth for classical Athens. The concept the sources call synoikismos?
Yes. Synoikismos. This is where we move past Bronze Age memories and look at the actual domestic statecraft that made Theseus so vital to the Athenians.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, the true historical achievement attributed to Theseus wasn't defeating a Minotaur. It was a massive political consolidation.
Right. The sources translate synoikismos as literally housing together.
Yes.
To understand why this housing together was necessary, we really have to look at the geography of the Attica region.
Attica being the broader territory where Athens is located.
Right. It's this triangular peninsula of Greece. Now, I think the modern assumption is that Athens always just naturally controlled that whole territory, right? Like it was always one big unified state.
That's what people assume, yeah.
But historically, during the early Iron Age, that wasn't the case at all, was it?
Not at all. Attica was highly fractured. It was a patchwork collection of isolated, independent villages and local communities.
It's like little microstates.
Exactly. And they were often engaged in petty border disputes and resource wars with one another. Each community had its own local magistrates, its own local council house where they kept a sacred fire burning, and its own fiercely independent local identity.
So it's a region plagued by constant low-level internal conflict, meaning no one can project external power because they are too busy fighting their own neighbors.
Exactly. You can't build an empire if you're fighting the town 5 miles down the road over grazing rights.
Right. So the myth asserts that Theseus recognized this fatal flaw.
He saw the big picture.
He did. He traveled throughout Attica and engaged in an unprecedented diplomatic campaign. He supposedly convinced all of these disparate warring villages to voluntarily dissolve their local governments, extinguish their sacred local council fires, and merge into a single, unified political commonwealth centered at Athens.
He completely centralized the state.
To put this in modern terms, I look at synoikismos and I see a massive, highly aggressive corporate merger.
Oh, that's a perfect way to look at it.
Right. You have a dozen competing local startups. They are all bleeding capital, trying to fight for the exact same small market share. And then a visionary CEO, Theseus, steps in and says, look, if we keep competing like this, we're all going to go bankrupt.
Will be destroyed by outside competitors.
Exactly. So he says, let's merge. We will abolish your local boards of directors. We will absorb all your small companies into one unified global brand. And we will build the new, shiny headquarters in Athens.
That analogy holds up incredibly well because it really highlights the extreme difficulty of the task.
Because mergers are messy.
They are. When you execute a merger of that scale, you face massive internal resistance. People do not want to give up their local authority.
No one wants to give up power.
Exactly. So you need something to build team cohesion among all these newly absorbed citizens who, frankly, used to view each other as bitter enemies.
You need a unifying cultural event.
Right. You need a corporate retreat.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to change the culture, not just the letterhead on the official documents.
And Theseus provided exactly that. To cement this new unified identity, the myth credits him with establishing the Pan-Athena festival.
The Panathenaea, what was that?
It was a massive annual civic and religious celebration. And the key was that it required everyone in Attica to travel to Athens.
Oh, forcing them to come to the capital.
Yes, they would participate in vast processions, huge athletic competitions, and these massive communal feasts that were funded by the state. It was the cultural glue that made the political merger stick. It actively fostered a shared Pan-Athenian identity.
So his real heroism was administrative genius. He built the bureaucracy and the cultural infrastructure of the state.
He was the ultimate state builder.
But I have to stop here and address a massive glaring contradiction that the sources bring up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The classical Athens we are talking about, the Athens of the 5th century BC that is heavily utilizing this myth to build its empire, was fiercely, violently proud of being a radical democracy.
Oh, absolutely. They hated tyrants.
Right. They historically overthrew their own ruling aristocracies to establish a system where everyday citizens voted in the assembly. So how could a radical democracy possibly claim a king, a literal monarch with a divine bloodline, who centralizes power as their ultimate founding father? Isn't that just blatant ideological hypocrisy?
It is a profound contradiction, and it was a serious intellectual problem for the Athenian establishment. I mean, you cannot have the populace idolizing an absolute monarch if your entire political philosophy relies on egalitarianism and the rejection of autocracy.
Right. It sends terrible mixed messages to voters.
Exactly. So the intellectual class of Athens, specifically the tragic playwrights like Euripides, they had to solve this problem.
Okay, how do they solve it? Because they can't just erase him from history, right?
Yeah.
He's too important to their maritime claims and their unification story.
Right, they can't lose the branding, so they don't erase him. Instead, they fundamentally rewrite his political philosophy. They retcon his character.
A historical retcon. I love it.
Basically, yeah. In the theatrical plays of the 5th century, you see a deliberate refashioning of Theseus. He's no longer portrayed as a tyrant who rules by divine right and raw force. Instead, writers like Euripides depict him as what the sources call a constitutional ruler.
What does that actually mean in the context of a myth?
Well, it means they wrote new stories where Theseus, possessing absolute monarchical power, suddenly realizes that one-man rule is inherently flawed.
Just a spontaneous epiphany.
Convenient, right. In plays like Euripides' Suppliants, Theseus acts almost like a democratic philosopher. He champions trial by jury instead of blood feuds. He establishes sanctuary for the oppressed. He willingly subjects himself to the rule of law.
So he plays by the rules.
He does. And crucially, at the end of his arc, he voluntarily hands power over to the people, declaring that the city should be ruled by the masses, not by a king.
That is an astonishing piece of political spin. They are effectively saying, yes, we had a king, but he was so brilliant, so enlightened, and so deeply Athenian that he invented democracy and then fired himself.
Exactly. He subverted his own monarchy to create a commonwealth.
That's wild.
It is. By ventriloquizing democratic ideals through the mouth of an ancient king, they totally neutralized the threat of the monarchical symbol.
It allowed Athens to have it both ways.
Yeah.
They maintained the ancient aristocratic prestige of a heroic founder to impress their neighbors while simultaneously using him as a mouthpiece to validate their modern, radical, democratic experiment.
It is a brilliant domestic resolution. It really is.
But, as we know, statecraft doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, it does not.
If Athens is going to all this trouble to meticulously engineer the perfect hero to represent their democratic maritime empire, they're eventually going to run into friction.
Inevitably.
Because they share the Greek world with another superpower. A superpower that has its own perfect hero. And this moves us into a really fascinating cultural conflict. The ideological proxy war between Theseus and Heracles.
Yes, this is where domestic mythology turns into international cultural warfare.
Set the stage for us.
So during the 6th and 5th centuries BC, as Athens grew in wealth and democratic power, they increasingly found themselves in an ideological and eventually military standoff with Sparta.
Sparta. The ultimate land power. Deeply conservative, oligarchic, and intensely militaristic.
The exact opposite of Athens in many ways.
Right. But I have a logistical question here. If Athens has the boats, the lucrative trade routes, and this flourishing wealthy democracy, why do they desperately need a cultural icon to rival Sparta's favorite son, Heracles? Or Hercules, as the Romans called him.
Right, Heracles.
Why not just focus on naval supremacy, build more triremes, and ignore the Spartan mythology altogether? Why fight a war of stories?
Because in the ancient Mediterranean, cultural capital and military hegemony were completely inseparable. You could not claim to be the leader of the Greek world, the Panhellenic hegemon, if your national narrative was visibly inferior to your rivals.
It's about prestige.
It's all about prestige. And the cultural threat posed by Heracles was profound. The sources outline exactly why Heracles was deeply problematic for a rising Athens. First, we have to look at his ethnic and political associations. Heracles was the supreme ancestral patriarch of the Dorians.
The Dorians being the broader linguistic and cultural group that includes the Spartans, whereas the Athenians identify as Ionians.
Exactly. It's a deep ethnic divide. But it went far beyond just a vague cultural affinity. The actual political structure of Sparta relied on Heracles for its very legitimacy.
Oh, so?
Sparta was unique in that it always had two kings ruling simultaneously, drawn from two distinct royal houses.
Right, a dual monarchy.
Yes. And both of these royal families traced their direct, literal bloodline back to the sons of Heracles. This was formalized in a concept known as the return of the Heraclidae.
Okay, wait. So when the Spartan kings march an army out of the Peloponnese, they aren't just acting as generals, they are claiming to be the living descendants of the greatest hero in history, reclaiming their ancestral rights. That is an unassailable level of political legitimacy.
It was a massive ideological advantage for Sparta. But even beyond his bloodline, what Heracles represented conceptually was terrifying to the Athenian democratic mindset.
Conceptual terror. I like that. What do you mean?
The Greek term used in the sources is bi, spelled B-I-E, and that translates to raw, overwhelming physical force.
Okay, well, Heracles is the guy who strangles lions with his bare hands and beats multi-headed hydras to death with a giant wooden club.
Exactly. His virtue, his arete, is proven through catastrophic, violent struggles against cosmic, supernatural threats.
Right.
But that reliance on pure individualistic force is exactly the problem for Athens. Think about it. Heracles operates entirely outside the boundaries of the polis, the civilized city-state.
He's a solitary wanderer?
Yes. He doesn't debate laws in the assembly. He doesn't vote. He doesn't rely on phalanx tactics where citizen soldiers protect each other with locked shields. He is a one-man weapon of mass destruction.
He's a lone wolf in a culture that is desperately trying to build a collective civic society.
And that extreme individualism makes him inherently unstable. The myths are absolutely full of instances where Heracles is struck by divinely induced fits of madness.
Oh, right, the madness of Heracles.
Yeah. In Euripides' play Heracles, this madness is so severe that he slaughters his own wife and children. He destroys his own domestic foundation in a fit of uncontrollable rage.
Wow. When you lay it out like that, it becomes incredibly clear why an Athenian democrat would look at Heracles and just recoil in horror.
Right.
I mean, if your entire society is built on the idea of rationality, civic duty, public debate, and the rule of law, Heracles is your worst nightmare. You cannot build a functioning, stable democracy if your citizens emulate a hyper-violent, unpredictable lone wolf who solves every single dispute by smashing it with a piece of wood.
Exactly. He is the antithesis of the democratic ideal. So Athens couldn't adopt him. But because he was so universally popular, they couldn't ignore him either.
So what do?
They had to systematically manufacture an anti-Heracles. They needed to elevate Theseus to be the ultimate Ionian counterpoint to Dorian brute force.
But how do you counter a guy who can literally hold up the sky and drag a hellhound out of the underworld? That's a tough act to follow.
You don't try to outmuscle him. You elevate Metis and Nome.
Metis and Nome, which mean?
Intellect, cunning, strategy, and technique. Where Heracles uses brute force, Theseus uses tactics. The sources specifically highlight the Athenian focus on pankration.
Pankration, that's the ancient martial art, right?
Yes, it was an ancient form of scientific wrestling and mixed martial arts.
So Theseus isn't just wildly swinging his fists or using a club. He understands leverage, He uses his opponent's momentum against them.
Yes.
Which is exactly what we saw on the coastal highway with Procrustes. He didn't just overpower the bandit, he calculated a poetic intellectual justice. He outsmarted him.
Precisely. And look at the difference in the nature of their enemies, too. Heracles engages in cosmic cleansing. He fights monsters that threaten the divine order Hydrus, Cerberus, the Nean lion.
Magical beasts.
Right. Theseus, however, engages in social cleansing. He clears the highway of human thieves, murderers, and petty tyrants.
Heracles makes the mythology safe for the gods. Theseus makes the roads safe for human commerce and civilization. That's a huge difference.
It is. Theseus is intentionally constructed as the ideal Athenian citizen soldier. He is sleek, highly educated in the gymnasium, disciplined, and above all, he is civic-minded.
He doesn't wander the earth alone having psychotic breaks.
No. He unites Attica, he builds a city, he establishes laws. He is the ultimate role model for a young, rational Athenian democrat.
It's a fascinating philosophical contrast. But, here is the reality of public relations. You can have the most philosophically sound, rational hero in the world, but if you don't market him, no one cares.
Right, you have to sell the idea.
You do. You can't just write a speech claiming your guy is smarter. You have to put it in front of the public's eyes constantly. And that shifts our discussion to how this ideological proxy war was fought in the physical world, long before the invention of the printing press or digital media.
Visual propaganda.
Exactly. How did they wage war with architecture and art?
Well, in the ancient Mediterranean, public monuments, temple architecture, and painted pottery, those were the mass media. They were the billboards and the social media feeds of their day.
Everyone saw them.
Yes. And as the rivalry with Sparta intensified, the Athenians utilized this visual media with just devastating efficiency. The sources detail a radical visual pivot that occurs between the older, archaic period and the 5th century classical period.
Because originally, if you looked at a vase painting from the older archaic period, Theseus and Heracles looked pretty much identical, didn't they?
They did. They shared a generic, heroic template. Both were depicted as mature, heavily muscled men with thick, full beards, just engaging in standard heroic combat.
Interchangeable action figures.
Basically. But as the ideological warfare heated up, Athens realized they needed to visually isolate their hero from the Spartan icon. They engineered a complete visual rebranding.
Okay, let's analyze the Heracles look first. How did the Athenian artists start depicting the Spartan hero?
They visually trapped Heracles in the primitive past. They consistently portrayed him with a wild, unkempt beard. He wears the unskinned pelt of the Nemean lion as a hood and cloak, making him look beast-like, almost feral.
Like an animal.
Yes. And crucially, his weapon of choice is a primitive, unworked olive wood club. It is a weapon of opportunity pulled straight from nature. He looks like a brute from an era long before civilization.
He literally looks like a caveman.
Exactly.
Now, contrast that with the new Theseus look. How do they update their own hero?
Theseus is suddenly transformed into the ideal classical youth, what the Greeks called an ephebe.
An ephebe.
Yeah. He's depicted as clean-shaven with shorter, neatly styled hair. He's often shown completely nude to display a sleek, athletic physique honed by disciplined training in the gymnasium.
So he looks like an Olympic athlete.
Right. Or, alternatively, he is wearing a highly fashionable Athenian traveler's cloak, the chlamys, and a wide-brimmed hat, the petasos.
Very stylish. And what is his weapon?
He does not wield a piece of wood. He wields a refined, manufactured bronze hoplite sword.
Oh, that distinction is massive.
It's everything.
Because a bronze sword requires mining, metallurgy, a division of labor, complex trade networks, and specialized military training. It is the ultimate symbol of a complex, advanced society.
Exactly.
This entire visual pivot is exactly like a modern political campaign ad.
It really is.
Think about it. Imagine running for office and intentionally dressing your opponent in a rumpled, out-of-date suit or, literally a caveman pelt while holding a wooden club, making him look angry and chaotic.
And out of touch.
Right. Then the camera cuts to your candidate, who is wearing a crisp, tailored suit, looking calm, sharp, and highly educated. You don't even need a voiceover. The visual communicates everything instantly. That guy represents the primitive past. I am the civilized future.
It is masterful visual propaganda. But they didn't limit this just to the pottery sitting in people's dining rooms. They scaled it up to the monumental level. The source material breaks down how Athenian architects literally weaponized merupes.
Okay, a Minotaur. Just to clarify, a metope is one of those carved rectangular marble panels that run along the top of a Greek temple, correct? Like a stone comic strip.
Yes, exactly. They are prime real estate for narrative storytelling on a massive, highly visible scale. And the Athenians used them to physically manipulate the hierarchy of the two heroes.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's look at a critical example outside of Athens. The Athenian treasury at Delphi, which was built around 490 BC.
Now, Delphi is crucial because it is not Athenian territory, right? It is a pan-Hellenic sanctuary. Greeks from every single city-state, including Sparta, travel there to consult the famous oracle and participate in the Pythian Games.
Right. It is neutral, highly sacred ground, which makes it the biggest stage in the entire Greek world.
It's like putting up a billboard in Times Square.
Better than Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
So the Athenian treasury is this small, temple-like building designed to hold the lavish offerings Athens dedicated to Apollo. And because of its location, everyone sees it. The treasury is built directly alongside the Sacred Way.
And the Sacred Way is?
It's the main winding switchback path that every single pilgrim had to walk up the mountain to reach the main temple.
Okay, so it's a billboard on the busiest international highway in the ancient world. How did the Athenian architects handle the mitropes there?
They made a highly aggressive, deeply calculated decision. The entire south side of the treasury, which is the only side fully and directly visible to pilgrims trudging up the Sacred Way, was exclusively dedicated to the newly invented, socially cleansing exploits of Theseus.
Oh, wow. So as you are walking up the path, panting and sweating, all you see looming over you is the Athenian hero imposing order, intellect, and justice.
Yep.
Where's Heracles? They couldn't just leave him off, right?
No, they couldn't erase Heracles entirely. That would be sacrilege at a pan-Hellenic site. But they achieved architectural subordination.
Architectural subordination? How?
His labors are relegated to the northern and western walls of the back of the building. You literally have to actively step off the main path, walk around the structure into the weeds, and seek him out.
That is so petty.
It is. They literally pushed the Spartan hero into the margins to prioritize the Athenian narrative.
That is geopolitically brilliant. It's like saying, sure, Heracles is around back near the alley, but behold, our glorious founder front and center.
Exactly. And the sources note they executed a similar but even more psychologically complex manipulation right in their own hometown.
Oh.
Let's examine the Hephaestion, the Temple of Hephaestus in Athens, built right in the middle of the 5th century BC.
Okay, this temple is exceptionally well preserved today, right?
Very well preserved. It sits on a low hill, the Kolonos Agoraios, directly overlooking the Athenian Agora.
And the Agora was the central marketplace, the civic center, the courts, the absolute beating heart of democratic daily life.
Right, so this is playing out right in their own living room.
How do they handle the rivalry here?
Here, the architects demonstrate a fascinating ideological compromise. The main eastern facade, the formal front door of the temple, displays 10 metopas depicting the labors of Heracles.
Wait, really? In the absolute center of democratic Athens, they put the Dorian Spartan hero on the front of the temple. Why would they concede that prime real estate?
Because they had to acknowledge reality. Heracles was a Pan-Hellenic titan. He was universally the most famous hero in the Greek world. To completely ignore him on a major temple would seem arrogant, impious, and culturally isolated.
It'd look foolish.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they acknowledge his universal status by giving him the formal front. However, the architectural subversion happens on the sides.
Here we go.
The north and south flanks of the temple feature 4 metopes each, and those exclusively display the exploits of Theseus.
Okay, so Heracles gets the front door, Theseus gets the side walls. How is that subverting Heracles? It honestly sounds like Theseus got second place in his own city.
We have to think about how human beings actually experience that building in 3-dimensional space. To view the Heracles metopes, you have to walk all the way up the hill and stand formally, directly in front of the temple. It takes effort. But the Theseus metopes are on the long flanks, which stretch back and face down into the city.
Oh.
To the thousands of Athenians standing down in the Agora, doing their shopping, debating politics, serving on juries, just living their daily civic lives, the sides of the temple are what they actually saw looming directly over them every single day.
Oh, I see the psychological trick. That's so clever.
As the sources point out to the people in the Civic Center, Theseus literally appeared as the active, protective guardian of local democratic space. He is physically wrapping his arms around the sides of the city, watching over the daily affairs of the democracy.
While Heracles is relegated to a formal, distant acknowledgement of the past.
Exactly. Theseus is the active protector of the present.
The spatial awareness of these ancient architects is just breathtaking. They were playing 3D chess with marble.
They absolutely were.
But, as brilliant as the architecture and the pottery were, they were still just art. Sometimes a state needs something visceral, something tangible, to whip the populace into a patriotic frenzy.
A tangible event.
Right. And that brings us right back to the story we opened with, the ultimate PR stunt in 475 BC.
The physical relics. This is where mythological engineering crashes directly into hard geopolitical action.
Set the stage for us one more time. Remind us who Cimon is and why he is invading the island of Skyros.
So Cimon is a highly prominent, very wealthy Athenian general and statesman in the years right following the Persian Wars. He is leading the military expansion of the Delian League. And in 475 BC, he launches a major campaign to capture Skyros, this island in the Aegean.
And what's the real reason he wants it?
The actual unromantic reason he attacks Skyros is entirely strategic. The island sits directly astride the vital maritime grain roads coming down from the Black Sea.
Oh, the food supply.
Right. Athens cannot feed its spewing population without that grain. Controlling Skyros is an absolute military and economic necessity to secure their food supply and continue expanding their naval empire.
So it's an imperial land grab driven by logistics. But, as we noted, a democratic populace might balk at pure, unvarnished imperialism. It costs money, it costs lives.
It does.
Cimon needs a narrative to justify the violence and the expenditure to the voting assembly back home.
Exactly. And he finds that narrative conveniently buried in the mythology.
Let's hear it.
According to the later, darker chapters of the Theseus myth, after his glorious reign in Athens, Theseus was eventually exiled. He sought refuge on the island of Skyros, where the local king treacherously murdered him by pushing him off a cliff and then buried him in an unmarked grave.
So to an Athenian, Skyros isn't just a strategic rock, it's the site of an ancient, unresolved crime against the Athenian state.
Cimon exploits this perfectly. After he secures the island militarily, he suddenly announces that he has received a divine oracle commanding him to recover the sacred bones of Theseus.
How convenient.
Right. He has his men search the island. And miraculously, as we discussed, they discover a grave containing the skeletal remains of a gigantic man buried with a bronze spear and sword.
Now, I am extremely skeptical of this miraculous discovery. I mean, what are the chances he actually found a giant skeleton right when he needed one?
Well, archaeologists and historians generally agree he likely found a Bronze Age warrior burial, perhaps a Mycenaean tomb that had just been forgotten over the centuries.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and Bronze Age weapons would look distinctly archaic and heroic to a 5th century Athenian. Now, whether Cimon genuinely believed he found Theseus, or whether he cynically recognized a perfect propaganda opportunity,
That you think is more likely.
the result is exactly the same. He declares them the holy relics of the founding father.
And he sails them back to Athens to an absolute hero's welcome. He buries them in a sacred shrine, the Theseum, right in the heart of the city.
That's an absolute masterstroke of statecraft.
It really is. He secures a vital, boring trade route, but he packages it to the public as a holy crusade to rescue the physical remains of their greatest king.
He weaponizes the myth.
He weaponizes the myth to justify military expansion, and then uses the popularity of bringing the bones back to secure his own political dominance over his rivals in the assembly.
It is the perfect, seamless synthesis of myth, politics, and military power.
It's unbelievable. So as we head into our outro, I just want to take a second to synthesize this massive journey we've taken today.
It's a lot of ground.
It is. We started with a mythological boy holding a carefully constructed resume, a mortal fodder for terrestrial legitimacy, and a divine sea godfather to justify a massive naval empire.
Right.
We watched him travel the Saronic Gulf, literally transforming arbitrary, chaotic violence into proportional, civilized justice.
We uncovered the deep historical reality of the Bronze Age hidden inside the Cretan cycle. We saw how the terrifying myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth was actually the cultural memory of mainland Mycenaean Greeks suffering under and eventually toppling the economic thalassocracy of Minoan Crete.
We explored the administrative genius of Sinoakismos, where Theseus became the great diplomat, merging the fractured warring villages of Attica into a single, centralized commonwealth.
And we marveled at the intellectual gymnastics of democratic playwrights like Euripides, who brilliantly refashioned an absolute monarch into a constitutional ruler who voluntarily gave power to the people.
And finally, we witnessed the fierce proxy war between the intellectual, civic-minded Ionian hero of Athens and the brute force, individualistic Dorian hero of Sparta. We saw how Athens waged this war not with swords, but through the visual branding of vase painting, the subtle psychological manipulation of architectural space at Delphi and the Agora, and the absolute PR spectacle of Kimon and the giant bones of Skyros.
When you look at it all together, the myth of Theseus is clearly not a simple campfire story. It is a staggering achievement of geopolitical engineering.
It really is. And to you, the listener, this is exactly why we do these deep dives. The stories a society chooses to elevate, the myths we teach in schools, the statues we put in our city squares, they are rarely accidental.
No, never.
They are deliberate reflections of the values a society desperately wants to project to the world and, more importantly, to itself. Athens needed to believe it was rational, democratic, and fundamentally justified in dominating its neighbors, so they built a hero who perfectly reflected those needs.
Which leaves us with a critical and perhaps provocative question to consider as you look at the world today.
What's the question?
If the ancient Athenians could so masterfully re-engineer a local hero, completely altering his visual identity, rewriting his political philosophy, and manipulating his narrative to legitimize their own empire building and counter their rivals, what historical figures or cultural icons are we currently retrofitting today?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right. Who are the modern Theseuses being constantly rewritten to justify the political systems, the foreign policies, and the cultural divisions we live in right now?
It's a question that completely changes how you consume the news, how you read history books, or even how you look at the monuments in your own hometown. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Remember, the next time you hear a simple story about a hero and a monster, look a little closer.
Because behind every blockbuster myth, there is usually a very real machine pulling the levers.
Keep questioning, keep diving deep, and we will catch you next time.